Hey folks, as an adventure athlete and someone who has, a daytime job and so many things in life, I've been looking for a smartwatch that's ready for adventure but also ready for daily life. Something I can connect my phone to that can keep track of fitness and health stuff, as well as have GPS capabilities, a compass, flashlight, things that I can use on adventures and in daily life. And I have found that finally in the Amazfit T-Rex 3. I have been wearing it for a while now, and it's so crazy because I actually forgot it at home yesterday, and I drove home from my work to get it because that's how integrated it has become in my daily life. And some of the unique features is it's super stylish, so it looks great. I'm actually getting a call on it literally right now, and I can see the caller ID and all that right here, and I'm going to go ahead. Hello? Hold on one second. Actually just got a call on it, and I could see who was calling right from my phone. I love that. That is so cool. But what I was going to say is we actually just had 2 hurricanes roll through, and I lost power for a lot of that. And we were running around like crazy, and I kept the watch on the whole time. It has an ultra-long 27-day battery life. And take it from me, that's true because I haven't charged it in a couple weeks, and it's still at 42%, which is crazy. But it keeps track of my steps and gives me insights into my goals. Obviously, I can check texts and phone calls from it. Has a little flashlight. It's so useful. What I also love is, man, some of these smartwatches are like $1,200, and people have been telling me, you got to have this, you got to have this. Well, I'm really happy with the purchase with Amazfit. It is a great deal. With over 40 million people using their products daily, I think they have a pretty great track record. So if you're interested in taking the jump into a smartwatch or another smart wearable of some sort from Amazfit, go to amazfit.com/ASP for Adventure Sports Podcast. And that's spelled amazfit.com/ASP. And then you can use the code for anything you find on their website, ASP, for 15% off any of their products. So like I said, I have the Amazfit T-Rex 3. I am really enjoying it. I'm wearing it right now. And the best part about it, my wife thinks it looks really nice on me. So, that seals the deal for me right there. Again, amazfit.com/ASP and use the code ASP at checkout. Hey folks. Oh man, where do I begin? Gosh, I haven't spoken to you in quite a while, and I want to explain why before we jump into today's episode. So I took a little over a month off of podcasting, and it wasn't totally planned, but it was something I needed. We've got a little baby at home and a couple other kids, and then also, I'm getting ready to change jobs, which is exciting because I'm going from what I'm doing now, and I'm jumping into full-time conservation work, wildlife and landscape conservation. So I'm excited to share more about that. So I've been gearing up for that transition, which is going to be, a big change from what I do now. But all of a sudden, out of nowhere, if you don't know, I live in Florida. We had 2 hurricanes come back to back and ravish our area. We did not get it as bad as the Carolinas. My heart truly goes out to those folks who are dealing with that unbelievable amount of devastation. But our area was hit pretty hard by both. We had some flooding from the ocean in our house. It literally came up across the street and got into our house. So I've been repairing that the last few weeks, and that's been really disruptive to our lifestyle, as you can imagine, floors and drywall, and our mother-in-law lost her house, so she's living with us, and it was just a lot. And then all of a sudden, right after that, here comes another storm that just tore down so many trees. It ripped up buildings. There were part of our roof was torn out, and it was just a mess. And we were one of the lucky ones. I am not complaining. So many of our neighbors lost everything, literally lost their homes from, flood waters or just, their roofs getting ripped off. It was really intense couple weeks. So we're just about done putting everything back together. It's going to take time to go back to normal. And like I said, we are so fortunate. I'm so thankful. My family's totally okay. We were without power, still without internet for the last few weeks, but we were without power for quite a while. And so it was camping in our house with 3 kids and a dog and my mother-in-law. It was an adventure. Honestly, I should do an interview about it. It was intense. Some of the most intense moments of my life were these last few weeks. But again, we are extremely fortunate that it wasn't worse because it was predicted to be a lot worse. But anyway, enough about that. I'm back, and I'm super, super happy to be back. We're not going anywhere. The show's not ending or anything. I wish I would have let you know sooner. And what's so great about today is we're coming back with an episode that is already an instant classic. Fitz Cahall, if you don't know that name, you might know the name of the show he hosts called Dirtbag Diaries. It is literally one of the first podcasts that was ever created back in 2007. Fitz and his wife, Becca, they have been producing and hosting that show since day one. And it's been going almost 18 years now. It's unbelievable that like they were so early into this podcasting game, and it was the first outdoors podcast. And so it's been going strong. It's told hundreds of different stories, almost 2 decades long. And what's so cool is Fitz now hosts another show called Climbing Gold with Alex Honnold, and their brand is called Duct Tape Then Beer. That's like their studio, if you will, or production company. But what they're coming out with now, very new for them, but back to Fitz's roots in writing, is a book. They're releasing a book called States of Adventure. And what it is, it's a accumulation of 30 of, the most impactful stories from the years they've been doing Dirtbag Diary, to tell the stories in a written format. So it's 30 stories that are meant to empower you and excite you to get out there and have some fun and do something cool. And what you'll notice is a lot of those 30 stories are tons of them are guests of the show. Probably close to half of them have been on the show to tell those stories. And so I've got a couple copies of this book, and I'm going to give a copy away to a listener. So if you're listening and you want to win a copy of States of Adventure, all you got to do is message me, either Instagram, Facebook. Just look up Adventure Sports Podcast or email me at info@adventuresportspodcast.com. Do that in the next 48 hours. I'll give you 48 hours and I'll cut it off, and you'll be entered to a drawing. And if you win, I'll mail you the book. I'll reach out. It's an awesome book. It's so cool to take a lot of these things we listen to and then put it into a written format and read it. It just draws so many unique things out of. You can digest it in a little bit different way. And there's also beautiful photography in this book as well. So it's really exciting. Fitz is someone who has been very inspiring to me. We call him the outdoor podfather. He has been doing this longer than anybody. The show's bigger than any other outdoor show. And it was an honor, absolute honor to have him on, and also to be able to come back from this break with such just a banger. I mean, this is he recorded his side. He's so professional. He knows what he's doing. So very happy to be back, and thank you for your patience with us. And it would mean a lot if you share the show with somebody and keep the word about Adventure Sports Podcast going. But all right, let's go ahead and jump into Fitz Cahall and States of Adventure. Welcome to the Adventure Sports Podcast. You heard a little of Fitz in the intro, a little bit about him, but Fitz Cahall, welcome to Adventure Sports Podcast. How's it going?
That's going great, and I'm super excited to be here, and I feel like the tables have turned because the last time that we talked, I was interviewing you about you doing the one day or the stand-up paddleboard across Lake Okeechobee, which is totally badass and still kind of blows my mind.
Yeah, it's crazy.
So,
it's funny. There was obviously a rush of media at the time, and then I literally have not talked about it probably since January or February. And even around here, it's like, oh yeah, I'm like, was that this year? That's crazy. And but what was weird about that for me is that your show, Dirtbag Diaries, which has been going for 17 years now. I mean, it's nearly
coming up
decades.
On 18.
Coming up on 18. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And to my first conversation with you in this way, I know we've talked with brand stuff before, to be interviewed by you felt very wrong to me. I was like, no. I should be interviewing you and talking to you about your career and what you've done and the stories you tell. So it felt very backwards when I was being interviewed by you at first. So now I feel like we're setting the course right. Like, I'm so happy to be able to talk to you about your journey. Are you tired of talking about your journey at this point? Because I know you're promoting the book.
No, it's been really interesting because for me, this whole process of going through and writing this book, it's called States of Adventure, and it's based on the Dirtbag Diaries podcast that we've run. And the whole process of doing it has been, I guess I'm a person that has had a tough time always being proud of the work that I would do. I just could never really stop and look back and say, there was just sort of like a more, like a sort of almost like a hunger that oftentimes really pushed me through a lot of my career. And I really strove to get better. And sometimes that meant that it was hard for me to celebrate successes. And so to go through this many years of stories and to think about that and put it together and think about all the people I've gotten that have been willing to share their lives with me and the things that I've done, I actually had this sort of great moment where I felt like I grew up a little bit by doing that, especially as a creative, where I was like, it made me really grateful, versus just always looking for what's next. And, I never imagined, when I started the show and it first took off, I realized my life had changed. But if you ask the 27-year-old me, are you going to be doing this for almost 2 decades? I'd be like, there's no way that this lasts for 2 decades. And to have that, to be in the spot where you basically get to, do your form of creativity or your form of journalism and, participate in a community the way that I have. Someone, this was this term I hadn't heard, but someone called me a story keeper, where I was like, that's an interesting, I'm not quite a storyteller, but I'm like a story keeper. And I was like, that's an interesting thing. And I feel really honored, and going through and looking at all these stories and looking at the body of work, I kind of felt pride in my work for the first time in my life, which sounds so strange sitting here right now saying that, but it really was a big change for me. So on a level, it feels good to talk about it, because looking back kind of made me realize, it's easy to think oh, coulda, woulda, shoulda, or oh, if I'd known this, I would have done it differently. But I was like, we did a lot right, and it feels really good.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I'm sure that you don't seem like the person that you seem like the person that would be hard to say before really taking this deep dive. You just would never pat yourself on the back that much. So I'm glad, because that's how we feel. It was a little bit of looking back and saying, oh my God, I did that. I was a part of making all this happen. And because I'm sure over 16, 17 years, there's stories you've forgotten even that you did. And then you look back and the memories come back and you go, we did that. That's incredible.
Yeah, no. And it's the, some of, cause some of it's so memory based too, of just being I remember being in that room for that conversation. I remember, even because a lot of times I would have done it, definitely for some of the stories we did, a lot of them happened because I was out doing interesting things. I was making outdoor films, or I was actually out on an adventure myself with a friend of a friend, and I would hear a story. And so there's these really powerful memories that are attached to many of the stories in the book, because I do remember working on it, or I remember the first time I heard the story, when I was out on some trip, or, just having an experience with another person, they shared something with me. And there was, so yeah, it was in that level, it took me back to certain points of my career and just experiences in life and the outdoors, because so many of these things were, the way we did them, sometimes it would be we're just sitting down and we're having a conversation across the table, or we're having a conversation on Zoom or Skype, back in the day. But a lot of times, no, I'd be like actually like hiking the Appalachian Trail for a segment with somebody and like interviewing them as we were walking for 4 days or something like that. And so there were it was a very visceral experience, some of the things that we did. And, we couldn't go out into the field for everything, but we did try to kind of make these stories feel immediate when we could. When there was an opportunity, we did try to do that. So some of these are like definitely, things that I like lived through. That going back, and it just made me really grateful that I've gotten to have these experiences.
Let me ask you this. Why, I know that when you first were trying to start your career in journalism and through media, a lot of it was written word, and like a lot of early podcasters, you being like one of the first 100 shows. I mean, it's insane when you think about the state of a podcast in 2007. It's almost like you stumbled into this success. Like, oh my gosh, this is a medium people really, this might go somewhere. Why go back to writing now? Why at this point?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. I'm sort of surprised people haven't asked me that. It felt like, I guess there was a level of like, a lot of what I do does start with writing. Like when we make stories, a lot of times like I organize my mind through words. And it's funny because I'm actually like really terrible at spelling and grammar. It's like just something that my mind works differently.
It's that Florida education. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so it's interesting, but that is my default side, is like I communicate through written words. And for me, it was just a matter of wanting to get these stories out there, because when I started it was a period where there were big magazines like Outside Magazine, right? There was National Geographic Adventure, which no longer exists. And there was they covered, and they kind of had to do it because that's the reality of their businesses, but they would cover Lance Armstrong, and they would cover Laird Hamilton, the surfer, right? And they would cover these sort of big names.
Laird and Lance, alumni of the show.
Yeah, exactly. So they would put those people up in center, and it was like the same 12 people every year, and maybe one time they put one woman on the cover of Outside or National Geographic per year, right? And so that was like the reality, and I just felt like there was so many nooks and crannies that could be explored out there, and I had sort of found these stories that weren't from big name athletes or big name adventurers, but they were really profound, and they were really powerful stories that really ranged the like in the first year, like I look back and there was stories about a bunch of friends who had the job of being the sort of climbers on the Matterhorn at Disneyland. Like they used to actually have, like on the roller coaster, they would have guys that would like climb, and you would pass them and see them as you were going up the big hill before you did the crazy descent. And that was like they're like, somehow they scored this amazing job at Disneyland doing this for a couple years in a row, and they were like all like really good climbers outside, but they had this whole sort of camaraderie. And so like there was that kind of story that was wonderful. And then that same year we also like I remember we did this incredible story about people, two guys that were deployed in Iraq. They were working in a medevac unit, and to stay sane during one of the most deadly parts of that conflict, seeing all the terrible things that they were witnessing, they built this like homemade climbing wall in the sort of like a unused part of a hangar, and sort of built a community around that. And it sort of kept them tied to remembering what it, like being home and what they loved doing when they were home. And it kind of kept them going. And I just thought there was a bunch of wonderful stories like that. And that's really like how I set out and intended to do it, is like, let's go find the things that maybe are falling through the cracks. And I think today there's a lot more of that going on. And I still, like, to your point about it, like talking to Laird Hamilton or Lance Armstrong is still interesting. And I think there's kind of room for that. And I think there's also just room for finding these stories of people having these incredible experiences outdoors that are really profound. Mm-hmm. Because, so much of it is fun, right? Like I think about this, and I've been asked the question a lot through time, is like, why do people do these things? Why does an Alex Honnold free solo El Cap? Why are people drawn to these sort of super bold, potentially dangerous things? And my answer was kind of like, I thought about it for a long time, and I'd be like, well, because like 98% of the time, it's fun. It's actually like a pretty good time. I mean, your definition of fun could be like a little bit different, but most of the time it's fun. And then there's 2% where it's really profound. You have a powerful experience with another human being. Maybe you get in an accident, or, you survive something. And those moments, that sort of combination of having something that is fun and powerful and might define your friendships or who you marry or how you raise your kids. Mm-hmm. And then couple that with like the fact that it is like actually can be a quite profound experience. The places it leads to you, that curiosity can take you. That's what makes it so sticky. And I thought there was just a lot of room to work with.
Well, tell me about with the book. What does states of adventure mean? What do you mean? What do you mean by that?
Yeah. Well, it's funny because I think if you actually go through the book, I sort of imagined, like loosely around it. It's not perfect, but loosely, like when I started writing it, I really saw like there are chapters in our lives, right? And as we progress through our experience as people interested in the outdoors and in adventure, there is the point where you are young, and it's like you don't know what you don't know, and you're just enthusiastic, and you're out there, and you're just like, well, let's go for it. And you get pushed around, you succeed, you struggle, but you start to kind of know what you need to do. And then slowly, you maybe you excel in your skills, or if you're an athlete, you excel at your actual sport or your endeavor, and you get to this point where, you're almost sort of seeking mastery. And then, eventually we age and we realize like, I think a lot of people find that they want to do something that gives back to the community, right, too. And there are different chapters in people's lives. And so for me, it was like, I think if you took a step back and you looked at the structure of this book, you'd really see the story of a life lived outdoors, lived in this way, where you have grown up, you've evolved as a person, you've sought out experiences and then been open to letting those experiences change you. And that's, I think, what the sort of idea of states of adventure came from. I think it worked well on a level of two, of just being like we kept the focus all in the U.S. or like all in North America essentially. Mm-hmm. And so I think it worked well on a different level. But the idea was that there's a template for a life in there.
What was that process like for you putting this book together? Was it harder, easier than you thought, about what you expected compared to what you do with Dirtbag Diaries usually?
Yeah. No, it was really interesting. I was a little tentative because I obviously I've heard the same thing from people be like, oh God, the book, I'm 2 years overdue on the book. I was like, oh God, how's this going to work out? And, for me, certain chapters were harder. Some chapters were really easy. Like sometimes I would be like, oh wow, that kind of came out in a single day or something like that. Obviously there'd be refinement afterwards. So it was a little bit across the board, but I think so much of that work had been done already on a level, and that really I was going through and kind of reworking and thinking and figuring out how to take this out of audio and put it into words, is that it didn't feel, it felt like an awesome experience. Like it felt like going and kind of revisiting like a trip you'd done before, like in a way, or like, going and riding a trail that you hadn't ridden 10 years that's like a iconic, or doing some sort of route in the mountains that is just like, oh, that's awesome. It's so good. And it felt like that. So it also made me realize like I had grown a lot as a creative, like gotten stronger, where it was like, oh, I have a handle on this. I'm not getting pushed around by it. Like I'm careful where I need to be careful, and I'm, confident where I need to be confident. And to go through that was cool. And I think if anything, the harder part, or the part that surprised me about it, is how much you have to push after it's actually done. because so much of like my regular world is like we do something and we put it out into the world and people listen to it and then we engage with it. And this process of like, oh, no, there's this physical thing. And now you have to work your ass off to make sure that it feels like it gets in front of the people that it needs to be in front of. That process is interesting because I think so often I'm always just looking to the next thing. That's been the nature of how I've been a creative and how I've been how I've done all my work, is that I kind of am like, okay, that was great, on to the next thing. And I don't take too much time to celebrate. And this one has been a little bit more of a moment of being like, I got to figure out how to do some live events, and I got to figure out how to kind of like really care for this thing that, really has been made as a team, but by many people, many different people through the years, working on the show. So that side of it has been the most interesting part about being like, I got to get the word out there because these stories, I care about them. And I think that they have the ability, and I know they have the ability because they have on the show, to really influence and impact people's perspective and make them think and make them laugh. And in some cases, even change their lives.
Wow. Let's take a quick message break and hear from the folks that help make this show possible. There are so many advantages and benefits to learning new languages. And for outdoor and adventure athletes and explorers like those of you listening, it helps to know at least some conversational language into the places that we're traveling. Not to mention all the cognitive benefits, the ability to, appreciate a culture much more deeply, and peace of mind when traveling on international trips. It can be really difficult, but one of the most trusted names in learning language is Rosetta Stone, and today's podcast is sponsored by Rosetta Stone. It is the most trusted language learning program available on desktop, available as an app. It's super easy and user-friendly, and they've been doing this for over 30 years with millions of users who have gone to have wonderful experiences learning new languages. They have built-in true accent feature, which gives you feedback on your own pronunciation. It's like having a personal trainer for your accent. It's convenient. You can engage with the program anytime, anywhere. You can learn on the go, right with your phone. And lifetime memberships come with 25 languages. And that is what they are offering you today. There's no better time than right now to get started. Adventure Sports Podcast listeners can get Rosetta Stone's lifetime membership for 50% off. Again, that's lifetime membership for 50% off. Visit rosettastone.com/today. That's 50% off, unlimited access to 25 language courses for the rest of your life. Redeem your 50% off at rosettastone.com/today. Hey folks, I know a lot of y'all love your animals out there, and a lot of us have dogs and cats and horses and everything we love. And a lot of times they start getting older. It's harder for them to be mobile. And some CBD products could really be beneficial to helping them have a really healthy life and helping with that longevity. So today I'm excited to talk about our sponsor, Gaia Provides. I have a dog that's around 13 years old. He's having some joint issues, and I give him some Gaia Provides chewables. They're small batch, lab tested for quality, designed for pets, dogs, cats, and horses. And the company is very community impact oriented. A portion of every purchase is donated to one of their 3 partner rescue organizations. And they offer a ton of free resources for pet parents that you can go check out their blog at GaiaProvides.com. My dog is loving the wellness chewables and is helping him with his aging joints have as long of a life and as joyful of a life as possible. So if you're interested in trying Gaia Provides, you can use the code ASP for 20% off GaiaProvides.com. GAIA Provides.com, and use the code ASP at checkout. That is plenty of that for now. Let's get back into the episode. Now, I know a lot of folks who listen to this show obviously probably listen to Dirtbag Diaries as well, at least know about it or check in on episodes. And so a lot of these 30 stories that are in the book, you had done these episodes, as podcast episodes, you have learned these stories. What did writing them out draw out of the stories that audio did not?
Yeah, well, it was interesting because as you go through that process, you understand is there would be stories that I was like, oh, that's a great one, and we're going to include that. And I would go and I'd write it and I'd be like, that I'm not going to actually include that one.
What was it? Like it just didn't hit right, or just what was about it? The personality of the person didn't come through?
Exactly. Yeah. It would be the personality of like sometimes you talk to somebody and you're like, man, I could listen to that person talk all day. But it wasn't that they didn't have a powerful story. It's just that it was the way that they presented it, was like almost be like a little too like mystical or something like that. And you're like, I need more details, or like I need more perspective. And so that was an interesting thing to go through, of just being like, okay, like they're the stories that seem to work best really are kind of a lot of times a really good reflection of a true good adventure narrative, where there's a beginning and a middle and an end, and there's some moment where somebody has to step up to something that's deeply outside of their comfort zone, but that they've worked hard to be prepared for. And so those stories were like, when it came to writing in the format of this book, that's where I feel like some of these stories really, that was where some of the things shone through a little bit. The ones that felt more conversational, I often would have to go back and do more reporting and go and talk to the person again and be like, let's fill in some details here. Like, I loved our conversation, but I need to kind of fit this more into a written word format. And to do that, I'm going to need some more information, or I want to hear more about this, or I want to ask you a bunch of follow-up questions. So sometimes I'd have to kind of almost reopen the story and go back and just be like, hey, can you help me with these details? Because the conversation was wonderful, but sometimes it didn't translate easily into like creating a story that kind of had a beginning and a middle and an end.
Talk to us about the satisfaction level of completing a book versus maybe a podcast. I know an episode's different than an entire book, but maybe a series or a season. Do they feel similar in like completion and getting it out there?
Yeah. It is different because there's been so many podcasts, right? So it's like the level of that. Opening up when the box of books came, and opening that up, that was pretty cool, because there's a side of me that when I was like 21 or 22 was like, I'm gonna write books, or I'm gonna be a quote unquote traditional writer, and to have that, and then I went on this very different journey, but at the same point, it's not crazy different, but it wasn't what I imagined I would be doing with my life, because it didn't really exist when I was 20. But then to open it up and sort of see this manifestation and see that it's like, I don't think that what's happening, on the Dirtbag Diaries needs any validation, but there is a level of it where it kind of feels like it's almost like you got a greatest hits album released out of it.
Yeah,
and that true. Side of it is kind of cool. So actually like opening up the box and seeing it, and then the week it came out kind of in early August, and there's a great bookstore in Portland, Oregon called Powell's Books, and like we looked on, we can kind of see where the book is, and we were down there visiting my brother, and Becca said, hey, there's a few copies at Powell's. Let's go check it out. And so we drove down to Powell's, and I remember walking in, and the customer service representative, it's a really big bookstore. I was like, hey, is this strange? But like, we just published a book, and we see that you got a couple copies, and like the publisher said maybe we should come in and try to sign something. And they were just like, yes, oh my God, this is awesome. And then the next thing you know, like they were like, hey, cover my shift. I'm like taking this person here. And then like they walked us back to, it was like kind of their adventure sports or adventure travel zone. And, it was like, there it was. And, it's between, it was like, I looked around at the other authors that it was next to. It was, because my last name's Cahall, it's like, it was Anthony Bourdain, Bill Bryson, the Elizabeth Gilbert, Eat, Pray, Love, and then like there's this book here, and I don't think it's necessarily on that level, it's a different beast than those books are. But I was like,
that
was a cool experience. It's on the shelf, and to be surrounded by those people, it was like I had a moment of pride, and not in like a vain way, but just like as someone who's had a tough time celebrating the successes, that to me was a good embodiment of just everything I had put into making this show, and that everything, the whole team here has put into making the show. So that felt really cool.
Wow. That's Fitz. That's awesome. I want to ask this, because I'm sure this informed how you wrote the book and how you put these stories together, but how would you best describe the way your definition of adventure has changed over the years? I'm sure it has. Maybe it hasn't. I don't know. You tell me. But if it has, how has it changed from when you started this almost 20 years ago and now?
Yeah. Well, I think what it is that you realize that, if you work in this field, I feel like there's a layer where you realize like, oh God, the what is an adventure is a tricky question, because, what somebody, if they're walking to the South Pole or skiing across the South, like, Antarctica, that, that checks boxes, right? For sure. But what about somebody who's in their own backyard, right? That somebody like, that looks at Lake Okeechobee and says, why couldn't I stand up paddleboard across that? And that's clearly an adventure too, but it's maybe not like that sort of standard adventure narrative. And really what it comes down to, I think, is there's an essence of I think adventure requires curiosity, and it requires a little bit of doubt, and it requires some level of belief, of where you say like, I have doubt, but I also have belief, and I'm gonna go to the belief side here. And I think people can find that in so many different ways, right? And I think if you have those components, no matter the sort of scale of what you're doing, the feeling of it, the feeling of what produces is quite similar. And, it's like you and I clearly are like never, like if I had to phrase it, but it's like growing up, I was part in Florida, and then I was also part in the Bay Area. And so I grew up.
Where in Florida, by the way? I've never asked that.
Yeah, we were in Palm Beach. So like West Palm Beach, my mom ran the museum in West Palm Beach, and we were there. And so I was a Dolphins fan too, but I really loved the Niners when we were there. And, like it was like the Jerry Rice, Joe Montana era. And it was, so cool. And for me, like I never had the ability to experience something like what NFL football player goes through. Like I never will have the chance to be in the Super Bowl. I'll never have the that feeling of having 100,000 fans just cheering for you, right? But in my life, I've had other people that I like admire, or like look up to, or like there's the great climber Tommy Caldwell, who's done all these incredible free routes on El Cap. And it is interesting because I can go climb El Cap, and I might not be as good as Tommy Caldwell. I might not be able to do quite the difficulty that he does, but I know the feeling, and I can experience that feeling. And that is really cool. And that's what kind of connects all of us. Is, yeah, there's the upper echelon of the adventure sports, right? But really, you realize like there's a lot of overlap between the people that just are weekend warriors to the people that are doing it on a professional career level. We get to experience, we have access to the same emotions, and that's really cool. And on a lot of levels, we have the ability to have access to a lot of similar overlapping experiences too.
Did you understand that kind of nuance with adventure early on? Because I feel like it's an ongoing, it's like whack-a-mole a little bit with listeners and with the audience, of like making sure folks understand what adventure is. And it doesn't look obvious. It's not always obvious. And it's not always the biggest and the baddest, and I just feel like there's always this new crop of people maybe getting into it, young people, like, it has to be this, it has to be the biggest, the tallest, the farthest, whatever.
Yeah.
It can really be a career change. It can really be, parenthood. Adventure can really be anything. And
yeah,
I don't know. Did you understand that early on? Maybe a little more than
I understood. Yeah, like I understood by the time I started the diaries, I kind of like got this of being like, oh, this is what's sort of special about these sports and about this community is that, you really can. I mean, you can interact with your heroes. Like, I mean, on a level of being like, you can go, take climbing. I kind of really came out of the climbing area. But, if you wanted to go repeat a route that one of the most famous climbers from the 1970s did, you could go do that. And you could actually go learn from that route. And then you get to add your own little chapter into the whole collection of everything. Maybe you get to go establish a new route, taking what you've learned from the people before you and doing that. And to do that, the biggest thing is, you have to obviously, put yourself out there. You need to be prepared. You need to have all the skills. You need to do it. You need to take the stepping stones and follow that through. But no one's going to stop you. It's not like getting a job or making a team. Is like that's self-selecting. And so I did understand that there is that layer of like adventure really does become a little bit about the eye of the beholder and where it is and what it is, because it can feel really, to one person, adventure might not seem like a big deal to another person and vice versa. And I think it's mostly about the growth that comes from that process. And cause like, right. I mean, I think we've probably both witnessed people that are capable of, doing really bold, really, challenging, dangerous things. And yet they're scared shitless by parenthood. Right. And that is like, that's a funny part about this is, so I think that, if you really wanted to distill it down, I think adventure often produces growth and personal growth. And I feel like that for me becomes, a little bit of a barometer for like what I consider inside that realm. And some people might say, oh, you watered it down or whatever, but I don't look at it like that. I think I just tapped into something that was out there.
As you poured over your catalog of episodes, kind of conversations, and just the things you've told, did you come to the realization that there's a type of story that you no longer tell, or one that you're maybe glad you stayed away from early on? Have you noticed differences in what even you want to highlight?
Yeah. I think that's a great question
Yes.
In terms of that. And I think that there are, yes, the answer to that is I think that, I think I'm glad that there have been stories where we've told it where it's like, oh, somebody did something the fastest, right? But we haven't told that story because they did it the fastest. Because I feel like that's what's changing all the time, is that when it's like, when you're sort of putting all these qualifiers on an experience, it sort of takes away from the experience itself. So I think that some of it we avoided, some of the more, I would say like commercial or, kind of like branded expeditions or stuff like that. That occasionally made it in there because someone had a great story out of it. But I think in general, it wasn't, we stayed away from things that maybe would have gotten headlines. And I covered it in other aspects of my work and did that. But I think by staying true to that, I think we came up with like a lot of really different kinds of stories that made an impact on it in a good way. And I still think there's I still love the badass, like the full scale badass adventure story. I love that story. There was I've got two friends here in town that like Caitlin Gerber and Jenny Abeg, and they're two incredible kind of like endurance athletes. One's more of a climber, one's more of an ultra runner, and they did this incredible connection through the Cascades, the North Cascades up here. Basically, they did the heart of the North Cascades in 7 days, crossing this incredible amount of complex terrain that other people had done parts of, but most people would take like 7 days to do those parts, and they connected 5 of these sections in 7 days, moving at this incredible speed and doing this, and no one had ever done it before, and that side of it was great. But what I also love about that is how they found that 2 hours away from Seattle. And so like that for me is like, I love that story where there are these two people, they didn't actually know like this was almost like they joked it was like their first date. They had maybe done on one like little shakeout day together, and then they went and just did one of the most badass things that you could do as a human being on this planet, 2 hours away from their home. And they became dear, dear friends over the course of that 7 days. That to me is the embodiment of like a really cool adventure story, where it is like it was totally cutting edge, and yet the real important part about that is their friendship that came out of it.
The friends we made along the way. That classic line. That's awesome. That is so cool. Because like you said, it is that incredible, just on its own, that adventure is so noteworthy and so episode worthy. But the fact that there's this deeper story and connection and human experience that we can all relate to, that's what takes it to that level. That's awesome. It sounds like those are the kind of stories that excite you the most, maybe now. What have you noticed about how you've changed in what really brings a lot of excitement to you with storytelling? Because I've only been hosting for 5 years, almost 6 years now, and I can tell the change I've had, and you've basically tripled that. How has what excites you changed over the years?
You know, there's I don't get to do this all the time, but there's been there's a couple creatively. I get excited when I can actually tell like multi-part stories. You know, that's something that's almost got chapters to it in audio. Like when those opportunities arise where I'm like, oh, this story actually needs like 4 episodes to get through it. I like that because I feel like to me that is like the expedition of podcasting. Like you go and you assemble, you basically like you make this giant mess because you go and talk to maybe 10 to 15 people. You do all this research and you're like, oh my God, I have, an LCAP worth of audio that I need to go turn into something and make happen. And it is like very daunting, and you have to, you basically just kind of just have to start plugging away at it and stay very present in where you are in the process, and then sort of have this belief that this story will slowly take shape and it'll be something kind of incredible if you keep through it, providing that effort. And that for me is like, we've had a chance to do a couple of them. We have another podcast that I produce for Alex Honnold, and on that show we've gotten to do a couple of these sort of deep dive 4 episodes stories. One was on the sort of legendary plane wreck in Yosemite, where $2 million of weed crashed in an airplane in the high country. It's sort of like the basis for the 1980s cliffhanger for the 1990s film Cliffhanger. But it actually had all these really profound true life impacts on these people's lives that were there. And so we went back and talked to everybody who'd been there, both on the ranger side and, on the climber side, as they sort of like had this mad scramble to kind of get this weed out and sell it, and all the different ways it changed people and whatnot. So I love that kind of story, that sort of big, ambitious side. That I'm looking for those. I like doing them. They're hard to do. They require a lot of time and a lot of money. But
money in the sense of time, or money to literally just make it happen. You got to travel, all that.
More like money in the time. Yeah, because like those aren't something you can do. I mean, you could do it on your own, but it would take forever. So you really do it's kind of like the same way you'd build a team on an expedition on something like if it's something like that, it's like more like making a film where you're like, I'm going to need a bunch of different people that have different skills that can like help me with this. And so you have to do that. So some of that's been really inspiring to me. And it took me, I wish I had gotten better at that earlier. You know what I wish, like, if there's one regret is I wish I maybe had like tried some of that a little bit earlier in my career. Because I really enjoy it now, having done a few of them now. So that's pretty cool. And yeah, I don't know. I just think there's magic in human connection and asking questions. There's just like this awesome, very human, very powerful feeling to connecting with people and realizing that, a lot of times it's us that are afraid to ask the hard questions too, but most people are actually like, if they're sitting down and they're sharing with you, they're ready to answer difficult questions or questions that, might challenge you. And I think that is just one of my favorite parts of my job is when I get to talk to somebody where I'm like, it's just that experience is profound, and I appreciate you sharing that with me. I mean, I think about it, and even last year, and we talked to a competitive climber, like somebody who climbs like on plastic, like comp climbing, Jenya Kazbekova, who is Ukrainian and kind of had to leave Ukraine and struggled with like, what am I doing as an athlete as people go through this, and she ended up qualifying and making the Olympics, which was this huge moment, both in her life and then for her country. And to sit down and like get to be there for those conversations and just see the power and the emotion of people as they go through that, like it's so human. It's powerful and rad. And I'm like, I've had 6 or 7 conversations that like kind of equal that this year. And to have that in on a day-to-day level where you're thinking about that or like processing it, and you remember it and you learn from people, that side it's so cool. So that's what I really love about the creativity now.
I can feel when I haven't had one of those conversations in a while, like, because I feel like I'm missing something. And my wife, Emily, will actually point out, she's like, you have not told me about an interview in a while, like around at the dinner table, for instance, like, because that's where I kind of debrief immediately. I can't wait till that night. I'm just like, you will not believe who I talked to today or what this story was. And if she noticed,
oh man, now I feel like I gotta live up to that standard right now with this interview. I'm like, oh god.
Oh no, she had a pre-brief before we talked. I'm like, you're not gonna believe who I'm talking to today. I'm like the Podfather, the outdoor Podfather. I'm Fitz Cahall. This is, I know, because she's heard your name before. She knows about Dirtbag Diaries from when we talked before, and obviously it's a show I've been listening to for years. It's such a treat. It's such a special moment. There's like this aura around a great conversation, this human connection, and this is before it ever goes public. And you're just like, I am so privileged to be able to have this conversation, because there's not a lot of mediums in today's world that provide this almost runner's high in such an efficient way. Like running, such an efficient way to get that high. Like biking takes a couple hours. Running, you can get it in like 20 minutes. Podcasting, you give an hour conversation between people and you're just like, it's all you're thinking about all day. It's like, that was amazing. And they're on the other side of the world. Like, how else can you do that?
No, I love that. I feel like I'm going to borrow that from you, or build off the idea of it produces almost a runner's high. I feel like that's a really comparable thing, because I feel the same way, where I just like, if I haven't had a great conversation, I'll miss it. And it's funny, sometimes it just happens with good friends, right? Yes, like there's like people that I know that like I, maybe don't get to hang out with more than 10 times a year, but I'm like, oh, do a drive with them or something like that. And you're like, oh, this is going to be awesome. Like there's actually like this weekend, I feel like there's a crew of dear friends, and we're going to go try and do at some point in the middle of the winter when it was like super dark up here in Seattle, I like had pulled out the maps, and there's a bike packing route that I've dreamed up through the sort of heart of one of the sections of the Cascades, and it might be a bad idea. Like I hope I have friends by the end of it, but everyone's like it's like a good set of people. And this is a crew of people that I kind of I say that I spent a lot of time with in my 20s and 30s, and then when the pandemic, some of them left Seattle, so I don't get to see them as much. And I always know that those people, when I get that, we get together like once or twice a year now, and make it a point to do it. And I know I'm going to have these incredible conversations. And it's like rooted in adventure. It's rooted on this crazy thing that we're like, oh, we're going to go do this mission right now and kind of run around. But it always goes so many interesting places, and I feel so filled up by that conversation. And then on top of it, that's obviously like just my friends and my personal life, but to be able to do that as a profession feels like such a gift. And I'm super grateful for it, because it just, for whatever reason, I like talking to people, and I like hearing about people's lives.
I'm right there with you, Fitz. It's just something that I've learned through podcasting that's like, this is really special. And it's so, I don't know if it's from evolutionary or biological point of view, but it's just so satisfying when you do have that moment, whatever medium that is. It could be a train ride, it could be over dinner or whatever. But let me ask you this, talking about human connection. You're probably somebody, just having been in the game so long, produced such high quality content, that a lot of people reach out to you. I don't know if that's ebbed and flowed over the years, but at this point in your career, what are most people reaching out to you for? Is it pitching a story, pitching Fitz, or is it, asking advice? Like what do most people?
Yeah, it is an interesting, I feel like it's an interesting point in my career where I realize like there's, like inside of community, inside of creativity, I think there's a point where, early on, you're very certain of the thing you want to say. You're like, I have this vision for what it is, and you go and you do it. And then, if you're fortunate enough, you can kind of open up the floor to have to collaborate with other people that bring their own perspectives and their own passions to it. And, I feel like now more and more, my role is probably helping some of the next generation kind of figure out how to navigate some of this, how to make a living doing it, how to work through that. Like the issues are maybe different from 18 years ago, but the root of them is like, how do you do the thing you love and get paid to do it? And there's, I feel like that is one of the things that I try to make space for. When I see somebody trying to do something and they reach out, I'm like, I will always get coffee with you. I will always, jump on a phone call for 25 minutes and take a walk and hear about your world and what you're trying to do. Because I didn't get that when I was young, and it was just because I didn't know how to get that. And I think someone would have been willing to, if I'd connected with them, I'm sure that there would have been people that were willing to kind of like help me or share their perspective. But it just, for whatever reason, the tools for getting that weren't really obvious to me. And so I felt like I kind of, I don't know, I just try to kind of, when people reach out about that stuff, that's where I feel like this next chapter will involve some of that. And, I know there'll be a time in the future too where it's like I'll need to kind of be like the elder that maybe takes back center stage for a second, when there's like a moment. But I think right now I'm really excited to see kind of some of the new wave of people, what they're doing, both like on like athletic side and expedition side and the creativity and the adventure side. And then also just the people that are creating and figuring out how to connect communities around, this shared love for the outdoors and spending time outside. And, that I feel like is where a lot of the reach outs that I'm excited about are happening these days.
Let's take a quick message break and hear from the folks that help make this show possible. Today's episode is sponsored by Sundays. It's healthy dog food that's easy to store and serve. Most foods are one or the other. Sundays is both. It's fresh dog food made from a short list of human-grade ingredients. Sundays contains 90% meat, 10% superfoods, and 0% synthetic nutrients. My dog, Herc, who's getting old, he's about 13, he is loving Sundays. We have the beef and the chicken, and he is just tearing it up. And it's super easy. I love their resealable bag. A lot of bags are not resealable. This one's super easy to just Velcro right shut, open it up, get ready to go. And it's human grade, and I have tried it. I've tried both the beef and chicken, and I'm not going to lie, it was actually not too bad. I'm like, I would actually eat this camping if I was, just starving after a long day of hiking. It would be a welcome treat. You can also do subscriptions to Sundays to get 20% off and free shipping on every order. But if you want to get a better deal, 40% off your very first order of Sundays, go to Sundays, like the day of the week, sundaysfordogs.com/A-S-P. So usually it's ASP. This is A-S-P for Adventure Sports Podcast. Again, that's sundaysfordogs.com/A-S-P. Thank you. Warmer, sunnier days are calling, and you can fuel up with Factor's no prep, no mess meals. You can meet your wellness goals, have fresh, never frozen meals that are smart, protein plus, even keto, diet friendly, dietitian approved, and ready to eat in just 2 minutes. And having a newborn in the house, any sort of time-saving meal option is ideal. And every time we have kids, we do a meal prep service. And for our most recent child, we are choosing Factor meals. They have 30 different meals and more than 60 add-ons to choose from every week to make your day delicious, from sun-up with breakfast to sundowns and snacks and everything in between. There's all sorts of ways to customize it for whatever your dietary needs are. And if you want to try Factor meals, go to factormeals.com/ASP50 and use the code ASP50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month. Again, that's code ASP50 at Factor Meals, FACTOR meals.com/ASP50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off next month while your subscription is active. That is plenty of that for now. Let's get back into the episode. At some point you will be that elder you're talking about, and it's through this medium especially. How have you stayed the course and not really gotten caught up with trends through the years? Because I've heard you talk about this with like video. I don't do video on podcasts. Yeah. One, because I feel like the lifestyle we're trying to promote is off screen. It's like, hey, we know obviously connecting on the internet is a huge part of planning adventures, learning about adventures. I mean, I the moment I had my first adventure, I immediately went to the library at my school and started researching, is this possible? So it's very useful, but we've kind of just not gone that way. But you have a background in film as well, experience with that. Why not jump on some of those? Yeah,
I think that's such a great layer, because I think that that's a question I struggle with, and because it's like the world's going to evolve, right? It's like the world's always changing. People's tastes are always changing. There's the constant is that I am aging, and I don't know the slang that my middle schooler has when they come home from school, and I'm psyched to learn it, try it out, even though that's so embarrassing.
Put it in the podcast.
But it's like I won't have access to that the entire time. And so for me, I've tried to be really steady in terms of the trends, and some of it is from a business sense level of like, hey, this is the kind of thing I think I should be working on. This is the kind of in film, we're still doing stuff in film, but it's very focused, and it's very sort of like working on the development of bigger ideas that may or may not get made, and that's okay if they don't, but we're like, trying to kind of be involved in some of those conversations. And I think for me, I just, I've gone through a lot of the sort of current evolution of like entertainment in the internet age, right? And there were like on a level where like I did some of the first branded, quote unquote branded content out there. I was featured in some of that branded content even, where you're like, oh, this is sort of strange where this is supposed to sort of influence what car someone would buy because of what car I drive. So like I've there's been stages in my career where I've kind of been on that side of it too. And I think that there's just a layer where I would try things and I'd be like, this doesn't, I don't love this, like I felt like sometimes, for me, like social media was something that I just sort of felt like how we do these like big launches and, we'd be on social media and like, be trying to like see if something was going to go viral and you'd be like, oh, looking at the views and be like, there's 10,000. Oh, it's up to 50,000. It's up. Oh, it's into the six figures. And you'd be watching videos do that and you'd be sharing and reposting and doing all this stuff. And that felt to me like huffing glue or something like that. Like it was this weird, it was like the opposite of a runner's high. It was like this like weird, terrible feeling. And so I just have like these sort of memories of just being like, of like, I don't know, opening up TikTok for the first time 5 years ago or something and just being like, this will like change people's lives and people will do some really cool creative stuff with this platform. But this to me I don't seem like I really have access to it. And two, it doesn't really interest me. And so like on that level, that's something I just, even though it like, would make sense in a lot of ways to be like, oh, figure out how to make that work. Like everyone wants to, figure out how to make TikTok work. I think there were like a lot of like what the brands were saying. Mm-hmm. It just didn't interest me, and that's okay. And I let it go. And I think that's, like there's some common sense in that of just being like these, as new platforms come online, they're going to have younger audiences and, you need to figure out how to have it's like, I think I choose to look at it more on a community level where I'm like, oh, there's these younger people that are doing really cool things and telling stories in different ways. And if I can support those, but I don't need to do it like they are too. It's like, it's okay to kind of do it in your craft and your side and go from there. So I think that's how I've navigated it, is like, it just, and trends are also funny because I feel like it comes back around, like we're all of a sudden, like I've been like in podcasting per se, I've at least been through 2 times where people have said podcasting is dead. And it's like, that isn't true, and I've been through points where people are like just abandoning Instagram or something like that. And that's not true too. So it's interesting. Sometimes we'll have these sort of hot take moments of trends, but the reality is like a lot of these spaces we're working in are here to stay, and they'll evolve and they'll change, and they're always going to, some of them are going to get younger and some of them are going to get older. But it's like, for me, I think I just followed the stuff that I liked making. And I acknowledged when I wasn't good, like what I wasn't good at. And, tried to repeat it, like if I was like interested in doing it or it was like made sense financially to do it, I would try to get better at it. But I would also be like, this isn't my best strength. And while like, that doesn't mean you should just walk away from it. It was something that I would experiment enough with and grow enough to be passable at, but also would sort of be realistically like, yeah, that's not my greatest strength.
The good news is written word has been around at least a few thousand years.
Yes.
And,
yeah.
Books. And then also oral history is definitely a thing. We're just recording it now. And, these things have been around quite a while. I always think about it like water. I think of the show like water. I'm like, what is not the path of least resistance, but what doesn't feel like a lot of tension all the time going uphill? what is water going to do? It is going to find that path of least resistance, but it's going to optimize. It's going to maximize. It's going to go that way, but it's always changing and moving, and it will hit a bank and, slightly go up. But if that's not the path forward, it finds a different way.
Yeah.
And that's how a lot of these trends have been to me, like video. Do I want to implement that? Do I want to really dive into TikTok? And frankly, I just don't want to do it. And it's just like you said, there's a million people already doing it better. And I know I'm not going to do it that well. And that's a reason enough. But talking about that, you mentioned business. I know this is a lot of talking shop, but I'm going to warn listeners. I get this from time to time, a fellow podcaster, and we're just like talking podcasts the whole time. I noticed recently with Dirtbag Diaries, you're talking in uncertain terms about like the future of the show.
Yeah.
Can you talk to me about that?
Yeah, where we're at. I mean, first off, in our lives right now, there's like this career didn't exist when I left college. Like this wasn't a thing. This wasn't a job. This isn't a way you can make money.
It still rarely is.
yeah. But so like nobody knows the lifespan of a podcast or a podcast host. Nobody really knows, how long you could be a creator on TikTok. Nobody really knows the lifespan of an influencer.
It's like a sequoia. Like, hey, if the conditions are right, we don't know how long it can live.
It could grow forever, or it could be like one of those. What is it? The in Florida, the night blooming cereus, right? Isn't that tree that like blossoms for one night and then is like done?
Yep, absolutely.
And so it's like no one really knows what that is, and I'm on the front end of that experience, and they're like on a level like I actually like, as much as this is talking shop to some people, I would really say to everybody is that I think there is a really important moment of what's happening online and in the world of media right now. And I think it's hard for people to see. People don't understand it, but there are a lot of different things happening. People hear about AI. People hear about, just like things that are just like, like essentially the idea that there's not an agreement about truth or like what's real and what's not, or like all these
VR,
things, right?
Is
like,
another one.
Yeah, exactly. Like how, like, people that live their lives like very digitally versus people that live their lives in the real world. We're at like this crazy junction. And all I can say is that I don't think that, while there's always been advertising relationships, I think that the key thing is that oftentimes we wait for brands or big things to bail us out of problems. We're like, this something will change, or like, this company will pay for this show I like. And the truth of it is, like, we have this sort of ability to really focus our attention on the things we care about online to people that are doing creative stuff. And we can support them by listening to them or watching them, seeking them out, right? Reading those outlets versus just going and like mindlessly scrolling on a social platform. I think the biggest thing is I think that the internet is an incredible place when we treat it like reading versus watching TV. And reading, the written word, is an act of entertainment. It takes effort to actually do it. And I think that listening to podcasts is the same way too. You actually have to sort of sit down and do it. Sometimes TV is just on in the background. And those are two different things. And TV is like very much you're getting fed it, right? It's like, what's on TV right now? I'm watching that. And so I think that if we take this moment to think about like, hey, can I like be more of an active consumer of things that I care about? That's like really important. And I think that that's what we've seen. There's a lot of change in the big media worlds. There's, frankly put, there's like probably too much stuff out there. And so there's a tricky moment, both from like an advertising level. But I have this belief that our show, if people care about it, it can keep going. And we don't necessarily need to depend on someone at a company to have to like make a choice between doing their best job to sell a jacket and also supporting something they believe in. Like, I think that that's a tricky thing for like the advertisers out there, is like, if the best tool is to market on Instagram and your job is to help sell jackets, like, even though these other things should be here, even though you believe that like good, solid, thoughtful reporting and creativity, or like well-created content deserves to be there, they're going to be in situations where they have to decide which one they're going to do. Are you going to do your best job to sort of spend your marketing dollars to sell the thing you're trying to sell, or are you going to support the community? And, there are times when things are really good where you can kind of do both. And that's awesome. And we've been able to take advantage of that through many years. But I think that my hope for the next chapter is that, and I don't know if it'll work, but I think it's going to take, communities that build around shows or build around things online to support them. And that's how it's going to move forward. And it's like, yeah, there's going to be advertisers, but there's going to be a level where it's like, we need to care about the things that we like. And, that is the same way is true if you think about the resources in the natural world of being like, if that trail needs work, you got to look around and be like, oh, it'd be great if somebody did that. Well, that somebody is you. And so I think the same thing is true for the world of media, is that things we care about will go away if they aren't cared for and supported. And I think that, I've had a tough time always seeing in the last few years, like what the path through is. And that's something I've never had that problem since I started the diaries. Like, I always like, oh, this is what'll happen next. This is what we should do. This is what we should go on. And for a while I was like, I don't really know what this next chapter is. And I believe that it is probably, coming down to being like worrying less about getting 4 million views on a video, or, like having a TikTok video go viral. And I think for like long-term success, it's going to be about people stepping up and, supporting creators. And it's happening right now. It's happening on places like Substack. It's happening on places like Patreon. And for us in the, podcasting world, we've kind of like, we're starting to go to that level where it's like, we're going to, we have to ask. We have to ask our listeners to be like, hey, if you care about this, we need you to subscribe to this and to become sort of a member of the whole thing. And I don't think it'll work long term if people don't do that. And on one hand, that's a scary thing to say out loud, but I was like, the worst thing I can do is not say that out loud, is to not ask for help. And when I know I need it. And so I think we've been on that level where it's like, we don't know. Maybe, it's like we're coming up on 18 years. The podcast can go to college. It can vote. It can do whatever it wants at that stage. I guess it can't drink yet, but like
not
it's
in the US.
It's not in the US. That's right. So it's like, well, how do we grow? It seems like and I don't mean like how do we get bigger, but it's like, how do we evolve? And I don't know if we'll be here 2 years from now. And
can I ask you a hard question? How does that make you feel?
Oh, I felt like many different things through that. And I think, there's certainly like, I felt frustrated by that, because like you do all this good work and you realize like, well, you're not owed anything, like that's the truth. No one owes me anything, and it's like, I'm not gonna, like, I didn't want to end up old and bitter being like, wait, I've done all these things. I've, talked to all these people. There's all these people listening, like all that, like that. I didn't want to feel like that. And so I think that as I've gotten through that, I've just tried to remember back to those early days, in 2007. And if you asked me then, are you going to be here 2 years from now? I would have been like, I don't know. And I would have been comfortable in that uncertainty, because maybe you're more comfortable in your 20s with that uncertainty. And so I think there's a side of me where I'm having to rely on the younger version of myself, the younger version that is just is okay with change, and also super determined and super enthusiastic. And I think I've had to, go to that version of myself and remember a little bit what it was like to be in my late 20s, to have your mind on fire with creativity and passion, and come back to that and try to apply it in the same way right now in this moment. And, when I get to that stage, I'm okay with it. And I feel like, you asked earlier about what the definition of adventure is. And I really like, in terms of a career level, I'm hitting that. I'm doing the thing. I'm like stepping up to some challenge. I have a vision for the future, and I don't know whether I can do it, but I'm going to assemble the best tools, the best training, and bring the largest level of commitment I can bring to it. And then I'm going to try to do it. And it may or may not work out. And that's okay. Because that, if you look back on it, on one level, you're like, well, if it goes away, it'd be a failure. And you're like, how could I, this book is a testament to that. How could I look back at this last 18 years and say that's a failure? Because it's been magic, Mason. It's been like a really giant gift to have this in my life. And I don't want it to end, and I'm going to fight hard for it, but I'm okay if it does, and I'm grateful for it, because everything's got to end. And, if it ends in the coming years, that's okay. But I know that we've had an incredible outpouring of support from the listeners too. And I think they're giving me hope. That's what's actually happening, is that they're giving me hope, and I can say these things, and that side of it is like, okay, it's working. It's not, you'd love it to be like, oh, it's working right away. But you're like, no, it's growing, and it's getting bigger. And we're building a new model, which kind of looks like maybe some of what the future of the internet will look like. And that to me is I guess that's kind of what I've always done. And so I'm just doing that again. And I'm not totally sure if it's going to work, but that's okay.
Wow. That's, I know you started Dirtbag Diaries as a resume builder, really. And it has more or less become your resume entirely.
Yeah.
Can you imagine a world without Dirtbag Diaries? Let me rephrase that. You already answered that. Could you see it going on without you in a way?
Yeah, I mean, I think that they're why not? I mean, right? I think that there's a layer too of I think that because the Dirtbag Diaries hasn't just been me. I mean, I've had an incredible partner in terms of Becca in this endeavor, and we've had incredible producers working on this show through the years. Really, we just lost one in the best possible way, who went and took an incredible job doing really important reporting in California on rural health, with kind of a dream job situation. And so we've been super fortunate to have all these talented people. And there is a version of it where it's oh, I think that this could kind of exist beyond me, because there also could be a day where I want to do something else. There are other things I'm interested in. I would, I think right now, if I'd always have a hand in it or always be involved on some level. But I also could see it being passed on to, a younger generation at some stage. And I think that we've done that through hiring and who we interview, is that the show is not my show. It is a sort of collaboration between the community. And so I think we've always kind of kept that in mind in terms of how that happens. And I think that, I think there could be a version of it where it keeps going, and maybe it keeps going without me. I don't know, I guess at this stage, I'll cross that when I get to it. Right now, I think we're just kind of in a little bit of a dogfight, but again, I've been overwhelmed by the community support and people stepping up and saying we believe, I believe in this enough to put my hard-earned money towards it.
Wow.
And that's cool. That's cool. It's heartening.
Sounds like you're either refining or redefining or learning a new aspect of what your definition of adventure is. You're going through that right now.
I think that's yeah. Like it definitely. It's funny that like the connecting these two conversations because I haven't really done that before, and it's definitely funny to connect them because it feels very much that way of being like, oh, this is totally like. There's points too where like right now the situation we're in, I'm like, God, I wish this would just stop because it is hard. Like I'm having to work really hard and there's a lot of uncertainty and there's a lot of, like courage in it too. Like I'll allow myself to say that word is like, there's a courage in it of just being like, oh, God dang it. And it hasn't always felt good, but I'm working towards it. And I'm like, I believe in it. And I've got an awesome partner in Becca to kind of like, do it together with, and that to me, you're right. That is the epitome. Like, I think about before kids, Becca and I did this incredible traverse of the Sierra where we, kind of like did this off-trail route, 300 miles through the Sierra over like 6 or 7 weeks, and did our best to put up a bunch of new climbing routes along the way. And it was probably a terrible way to do it in terms of like the actual like exertion level. Just because we were carrying such heavy packs and, we'd kind of go sometimes like 8 days without resupply. So you had so much gear. It was not fast and light. It was like slow and steady. And that was one of the most rewarding trips of my life to do that with her. And this one is less scenic. It involves more computer time, but it's definitely, it feels like on a level to have that same power and that same aspect, and
with that same person.
Yeah, with the same person. So, yeah,
that's amazing. Well, Fitz, I know we've been talking quite a minute, man. I know you got a lot to think about, a lot to do, but let me ask you this: Are you? I know when you first wrote your parents the letter to do the 99-mile Everglades Wilderness Waterway, it was a huge no. Is that still on your list as something to do?
Yeah, it would be. It's totally funny. I thought of that, and that's right. We've talked about that in the past. Yeah, I got the hard no, and that's one that's hanging out there. It's funny. It's such it's a tricky one, because we're about as far away from each other as we could be in the U.S. right now. It's like, oh God, and it always seems like the prime time for that is like right around Christmas, right? And it's always it is
New Year,
tricky, Yeah, New Year, like early January, and I'm like, I'll get that done. I know that's one. I'm like, I know I'll get that done. That one's not going to get away from me. I owe it to my 15 or 16-year-old self that asked my parents to drive me to the Everglades and drop me off.
Man, that is well, what I love too about you speaking up for your community is, you're doing this for creators as a whole. Everyone. I've heard you talk about this. One, doing research, but I've heard you talk about this before. Is like where you spend your attention really matters. Like if you're just basically eating social media junk food or consuming social media junk food, well, that's what's going to continue to get made. But if you're eating the vegetables and the good foods and the stuff that was made sustainably, if you will, just like with what we consume in our bodies, you're going to see more of that in the world. And so, I'm very also proud of you for one, being grateful, being proud of yourself and calling yourself courageous. I feel like that's growth because I don't think you were doing that a couple years ago, calling yourself those things.
I don't think so. I mean, we're all, I guess you can teach an old dog new tricks occasionally.
Well, we're going to point people to States of Adventure. We're going to do a giveaway. Anything else you want to share? What people might expect to draw out of this? Even if they know about these stories, what are you hoping folks just rock away with? And then we're going to point them where they can find it. Yeah.
Well, I think too is that I hope that people see themselves in these stories, and I think they're from all different types of people, all different types of ages, different parts of the country, different sort of ambition levels, and I hope people see themselves in it. And I think I look back to when I was a teenager too, and finding like going to my grandparents and like reading through National Geographics and being like, oh man, this is cool, and how inspirational that was. So I think that there's a layer of this like where I just hope this book finds somebody that maybe needs it, that's maybe a little bit younger. And it's funny, when we first got it, my 12-year-old had a tough time relinquishing the book. We had to like go take photos of it and stuff, and I noticed it had disappeared into his room. And that to me is pretty cool. So I hope that maybe even if you're familiar with this show or you've heard these stories before, maybe you get this for somebody else that might need it right now, that might need a little nudge in their life to go try something they've thought about trying but aren't there. And that, per your statement about the definition of adventure, maybe that's going and getting a new job. Maybe that's going and starting a business. Maybe that's going and taking a trip of a lifetime. But I hope, if you know the show, maybe think about paying it forward and giving this as a gift, because I think that it's a good nudge. Like, I think these, and I'll tell you what, these aren't stories about me. There's a few stories about there, but these are about other people that I've talked to and that help them tell their story. And all these people in some way have given me a nudge in my life where they've kind of kept me going, and I've taken and I've learned from them. And I think that this book is like filled with lives that have just been lived with passion and with dignity and a lot of creativity. And I think we need more of that in this world.
Absolutely. Well, you're doing your part. I'm trying to do my part, and probably similarly how you feel. This book is, accumulation and something to hold on to is being proud. I think our show has reached a pinnacle. Talking to you, man, the podfather of outdoor and adventure sports, and this is great. I really appreciate you giving us the time.
Thanks, Mason. I appreciate it.
First of all, thank you so much for listening. It means the world to us that you choose to listen to the show. If you'd like to help us further, you can leave a review on iTunes, share us with your friends, your family. It goes a long way to growing the show. You can also support us financially through patreon.com/adventuresportspodcast. Link is in the show notes. And also, if you have an idea of who could be a good guest for the show, we're always looking for people to tell their story about the outdoors or adventure. So if you know someone, please reach out. Email us at info@adventuresportspodcast.com. And until then, get out there and have some fun. Hey folks, as an adventure athlete and someone who has, a daytime job and so many things in life, I've been looking for a smartwatch that's ready for adventure but also ready for daily life. Something I can connect my phone to that can keep track of fitness and health stuff, as well as have GPS capabilities, a compass, flashlight, things that I can use on adventures and in daily life. And I have found that finally in the Amazfit T-Rex 3. I have been wearing it for a while now, and it's so crazy because I actually forgot it at home yesterday, and I drove home from my work to get it because that's how integrated it has become in my daily life. And some of the unique features is it's super stylish, so it looks great. I'm actually getting a call on it literally right now, and I can see the caller ID and all that right here, and I'm going to go ahead. Hello? Hold on one second. Actually just got a call on it, and I could see who was calling right from my phone. I love that. That is so cool. But what I was going to say is we actually just had 2 hurricanes roll through, and I lost power for a lot of that. And we were running around like crazy, and I kept the watch on the whole time. It has an ultra-long 27-day battery life. And take it from me, that's true because I haven't charged it in a couple weeks, and it's still at 42%, which is crazy. But it keeps track of my steps and gives me insights into my goals. Obviously, I can check texts and phone calls from it. Has a little flash flashlight. It's so useful. What I also love is, man, some of these smartwatches are like $1,200, and people have been telling me, you got to have this, you got to have this. Well, I'm really happy with the purchase with Amazfit. It is a great deal. With over 40 million people using their products daily, I think they have a pretty great track record. So if you're interested in taking the jump into a smartwatch or another smart wearable of some sort from Amazfit, go to amazfit.com/ASP for Adventure Sports Podcast. And that's spelled amazfit.com/ASP. And then you can use the code for anything you find on their website, ASP, for 15% off any of their products. So like I said, I have the Amazfit T-Rex 3. I am really enjoying it. I'm wearing it right now. And the best part about it, my wife thinks it looks really nice on me. So, that seals the deal for me right there. Again, amazfit.com/ASP and use the code ASP at checkout.